Hi, this is Eric for Otoy. In this video, we're going to talk about working with geometric textures in Octane for Maya. And for this video, I'm using machinery_01.ma. It's just a simple machine in this scene. So let's bring up Hypershade. And go to the Octane section, and under Octane Textures, I'm going to click on Geometric. So what we see here is we have the Octane Dirt, Fall Off, Instance Color, Instance Range, Polygon Side, Random Color, and W Texture. So the Instance Color, Instance Range, and Random Color are all meant to be used when shading instances, or when you're working with like particle instances and that kind of thing. So we're going to skip the discussion of these textures for now. Likewise, the Octane W texture is meant to be used with hair or fur, so it allows you to change the color along the length of an individual strand of hair. So we'll save this for the discussion of hair. And instead, I'm going to focus just on Octane Dirt, Fall Off, and Polygon Side. So let's select this glossy material here, this yellow glossy. You can see it's applied to these yellow parts right here. Hopefully that's fairly obvious. And I'm going to right-click and choose Break Connection next to Diffuse. And click on this checker box, go to Octane Textures, find Geometry, and add a dirt texture. So the dirt texture is going to apply white and dark values. And the light and dark values are based on the proximity of one part of the geometry to other neighboring parts of the geometry. So it's an ambient occlusion texture, essentially. We only have a few settings here to worry about. If I increase the strength here, we're going to get a more pronounced effect. It's kind of like an interesting kind of stain effect on the surface. As I increase details, it'll bring out more of the details. In this case, you can actually see the faceting of the geometry, which could be a cool effect if you want it. Let's bring that down to, say, 1. And then the radius controls the spread of that ambient occlusion effect across the surface. So the slider tends to get very, very high values very, very quickly. So it's a lot easier just to type in values. And it depends on the scale of your scene. If your scene is really, really large in terms of dimensions, you may need to increase the radius quite a bit. But for this scene, we can use smaller values. And then we can use tolerance to kind of fine-tune the effect. If you want to invert the effect, click on Invert Normal, and it's going to flip which parts get dark and which parts get light. The dirt texture is a great way to add, say, things like dust and dirt, hence the name, to cracks and crevices, so you can apply it to the roughness channel of a metallic material, or use it with a mixed material or a mixed texture to add and blend different textures and effects in the corners of a surface. I'm going to switch to Viewport 2.0 just for a second and create a sphere. Let's move it up here above our machine. And here in the channel box, I'm going to set the open sub D level to 1, so it's subdivided. And let's switch back to OctaneRender. If the sphere is not appearing there, we need to update our cache settings. So we can do this by setting frames to pre-cache to 1. Now I can see it. I'll set that back to 0. Again, you can make a script button for this. This is what the script looks like down here. So let's select this and choose Save Script to Shelf. I'll call it pre. Okay, that way we can just click on this button to execute that command. And I'm going to create a diffuse material and apply it to the surface. Let's graph this diffuse material. So I'll select it and graph input and output connections. And I'm going to, let's move this over so we can actually see it. There we go, that's better. So the Octane diffuse material allows you to add emission, so you can make this glow. So I'm going to click on the checker box next to emission, and let's use black body emission. And I'm going to turn on surface brightness, so it's nice and bright. and pump up the power so it's really definitely illuminating the scene. Okay, so why am I doing this? Because I want to use the fall off texture. So let's select this diffuse material, and I'm going to set the opacity to 0, which makes the surface completely disappear. So as I bring this up, we could see that the surface reappears as well as the brightness in here. And what I'm going to do is let's click on fall off texture, and we can either connect it with a wire right here, we can middle mouse button drag, doesn't really matter. I'm going to set texture output. Oops, let's do this to, actually the easiest way to do it, I'm going to select that Octane diffuse material, middle mouse button drag, Octane fall off to opacity. There we go. Now you can see that the fall off texture basically works on the facing ratio of the surface. And I probably have this black body emission set way too high. Let's set this down back down to like 100. So it's not so over the top. And let's bring the temperature up. Let's bring it down. That's nice. Make it kind of a warm color. So as you can see, I have the fall off texture is affecting the opacity of the entire surface. So we're just getting this kind of weird glow on the edges there. So now we can take a look at some of the settings in the fall off texture. So we have different modes. We have normal versus Iray, or we can set this to normal versus 90 degrees. And you can see the effect there is just kind of chopping off the top. Or normal versus vector 180 degrees. The most typical one to use is normal versus Iray. That means that the facing ratio based on the camera view determines what parts of the surface are going to be opaque and what parts will be transparent. The values here control the color of the opacity and transparency. So if I bring the minimum value down, you can see in this case I'm going to get a much thinner edge there. Let's move it like this so we can actually see through it. And then we also have a skew factor, which we can use to kind of fine tune the effect. So I'm going to close this. Let's select that sphere and delete it. And let's talk about the polygon side texture. This polygon side texture is great for things like leaves or like the wings in a butterfly that might have two different colors on either side of the surface. Let's create a polygon plane. Move it out where we can see it. Hit that button so it updates. And then let's rotate it like this. And just for fun, let's add a twist deformer. I'm going to apply a glossy material to the surface. And let's go back into Hypershade. And graph that material. So we could use the polygon side texture to blend two materials together using a mixed material. So let's take our glossy material, and I'm going to make this kind of a dark red. Increase the specular, and let's set the index to 1.8 and bring the roughness down a little bit. So we just have a red, shiny, glossy material here. Let's create another material. I'm going to click on this, and let's go to Octane Materials, and now let's create a diffuse material. Assign it, and let's make this black. So it's just a flat black material. Nice and simple. And now let's go to Materials and create a mixed material. So I'm going to middle mouse button drag the mixed material on top of this surface, And middle mouse button drag the red material into material 1 and the black material into material 2. And then the polygon side, I'm going to middle mouse button drag over to a mount. Of course, you could also just connect up the wires. I'm going to select this and graph input and output connections just so it's a bit more obvious as what's going on. Let's make this a little bit neater. There we go. But you can see the result. We have a glossy material on one side and the black diffuse material on another, even though it's a single-sided polygon surface. So there's no thickness to the surface. And then we have the polygon side. The only attribute is invert, so we can just flip those materials as needed. So great for working with, say, leaves, if you want to have kind of a glossy, shiny leaf on one side and more of a matte color on the other. You can use it to blend materials together to create that leaf effect.